Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Iqra Book Festival 2022. Next up, I have the pleasure of introducing Raisa Ahmed. She's a screenwriter and director working across film and television both. Over to you, Raisa.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am so excited today to speak to the wonderful Uzma Jalaluddin. So a little intro about Uzma. Uzma grew up in a diverse suburb of Toronto, but her favourite place in the world is the nearest bookstore or library. Her debut novel, Aisha at Last, was released in 2018 and is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice set in the Toronto Muslim community. Her second novel, which is the one we're focusing on today, HANA KHAN Carries On, was released in 2021 and was an instant Canadian bestseller. And that novel is a reimagining of You've Got Mail set in rival halal restaurants. HANA KHAN Carries On has been optioned for film by Amazon Studios and Mindy Kaling. And I'm pretty sure Aisha at Last has also been optioned for film as well. So some instant hits there, Uzma. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Raisa. And I want to thank the Iqra Book Festival for inviting me. This is really wonderful.
So we're going to start with a little reading from HANA KHAN Carries On, and then I've got a bunch of questions for you. And just to let the audience know, we can take your questions as well, so start sending them in as soon as you want. So Uzma, over to you.
Sure. So a little bit of background. I'll be reading from towards the end third of my book, HANA KHAN Carries On. And this is after an incident of hate that has occurred on Hannah's street. And she's sort of reflecting on the way that she's reacting to being targeted and being harassed, as opposed to the way that her parents, who are first-generation immigrants, reacted and the things that they had to put up with versus what she, as a child of immigrants, is having to put up with in her neighborhood. And this excerpt is from a podcast that Hannah runs, which is an anonymous podcast. It's called Anna's Brown Girl Rambles. So this is from the podcast. It's a transcript. Listener friends, sometimes your world is a trash fire. This episode will be about how to survive and thrive when things are going up in flames. There are things happening IRL that have made my life more chaotic than normal, and my commitment to remaining an anonymous brown girl podcaster makes this episode particularly difficult to record. The reasons for that are complicated. For one, when you are the daughter of suck it up, buttercup, immigrant parents, you learn pretty quickly that all your problems pale in comparison to the existential ones they faced when they were your age. Sad about a boy? Try staying afloat in a strange land. Worried about your job prospects? That's nothing compared to facing deep-rooted systemic discrimination, language barriers, a lack of job experience, and no family ties to help you stay off the streets when you first shift continents. You get the picture. I recently told my mom about a hateful thing that had happened to me. Her response was to casually share a story I had never heard before. When she was new to the country, she was rammed by an irate fellow shopper in a grocery store, a random race-motivated attack. Translation: what I had faced was nothing in comparison to how things used to be. According to my folks, I should get over it, because in the grand scheme of things, I am winning. But am I? Compared to what she had to face on the regular, yes. Compared to what I dream for myself, no. It is this personal accounting that gets me every time. And here's the truth of it all. Things are better for folks like me, the brown, the Muslim, the other. But because two truths can exist simultaneously in the universe, things are worse for us too. Real change is a boulder we keep pushing, but don't fool yourself into thinking it doesn't push back, because it does. Sometimes it pushes back hard. In my parents' time, simply being acknowledged as worthy of notice, as having your own history and worth, was enough. But that's not enough for me. I want to be included and celebrated. I want nuanced and plentiful stories to be told about my people. And I don't want it to mean something when one of us breaks through, because there are so many of us breaking through all the time in every field. When things remind me how far we still have to go, it gets me down. And then it makes me mad. I want it to change, but I don't know how to make that happen. I've learned a few things though. When you're pushed out of the safety of anonymity and made to stand in the glare of public derision, here's what you should do. Number one, find allies and gather them close. Number two, figure out who your real enemies are. Number three, plan out the best course of action over the next few days. And number four, remember that it's okay to be in survival mode. I know this all sounds bleak, but I hope to return to better times soon. And that's it.
Thank you. I mean, I think just from that snippet alone, it gives us a real sense of who Hannah is. And I have to say, I initially read Aisha at Last when it came out. Absolutely fell in love with it. I think I gave a couple of friends some copies as well, and I went, "You have to read this." And then when HANA KHAN Carries On was announced, I pre-ordered it because I just wanted to read more of what you were creating. And once again, HANA KHAN Carries On feels very different from Aisha at Last, but it feels like almost comfort. If I put it in a word, it's comfort. And I think that's what a lot of kind of the rom-com genre kind of goes towards, is it provides you with some escapism and some comfort. And there's always a love story, but there isn't always that level of depth that I think that your writing has, because I think you touch upon a lot of different issues that the characters face as well. How is it that you approach those multi-layered sort of narratives? What do you begin with them, or is it something that comes through the development of the character?
Such a great question. Usually I don't even start writing until I've really put a lot of thought into the types of characters that I want to talk about, because writing a book is such a hard thing. Like it'll drive you crazy. Like sitting down to write 100,000 words is just mind numbing sometimes because it's so much work. And a lot of that work is done in isolation. You're just sitting in a room with your computer screen, or if you're sitting in a coffee shop and ignoring everyone and just typing away. So I have to be really invested in my characters. There has to be something that is very deeply broken inside all of my characters in order for me to invest the type of time and energy to build them up and to tell their story. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons why it's really hard for me to just write. Sometimes I try just to write a story that's very simple, but instead I load my characters with like multiple subplots, and I build an entire like community around them. I just can't seem to help myself because I get bored very easily. So I need to make sure that there's something in my stories that keeps me going. And if there isn't, the story is not going anywhere. So I also think as a writer, as a Muslim writer, as a South Asian writer, as a daughter of immigrants myself, like I have so many things that I want to say that I've very rarely seen presented in a way that is nuanced and has a lot of depth to it. And I'm learning and growing myself as a writer, but I want to try to encourage those conversations. So I think that's part of what I try to do. And also just, being labeled as someone who writes romantic comedies, that's more of a publisher decision. I see myself as just writing like human stories, though I love rom-coms, I should say. I'm a huge romance fan.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think every sort of creative industry tries to give you a box that you can fit into so that they can market you a little bit. There will be writers listening in to this, and I think it's really interesting what you're saying about there's something broken that you need to find in your characters. And do you write bits of flash fiction before you then start planning out your novel, or is it that you do some character development and then plan out the novel? What's your process?
My process is a little bit of everything. I don't really do too much flash fiction, but what I do is I take the kernel of an idea. So when the idea for HANA KHAN Carries On came about in 2017, when I was actually, my first novel hadn't even been published yet. And I started thinking about and writing HANA KHAN Carries On. I was on submission, which means I was waiting to hear back from editors to see if anyone would be interested in publishing my book. And the advice that writers are given is don't drive yourself crazy, waiting for a response, start your next project, right? I'm sure, Raisa, you get that advice too, like start.
Yeah.
Moving forward, don't get stuck, right? And so I started thinking about it in 2017, but I didn't really start writing it probably for another year. So I spent a lot of times with the characters in my head, and I think this is why writing novels in particular is so frustrating, because it's so slow. And for me, and I have to say that I know writers who can like bang out a first draft in 6 weeks, and I'm like, I don't know how you do that. But I'm an incredibly slow drafter. Like I sit there, I write up very complicated character sketches, just trying to figure out who these characters are. I've become a plotter, so I'll have like a 10-page plot summary of what happens in the entire book. I'll delve into the themes. I find that thing that happens when everything I read in the paper, in the newspaper, or I watch on TV, like the news just starts to take on a new meaning when I start thinking about my book, because everything relates back to my characters in my books. And I almost become like a magpie. I like grab little pieces of interesting information, and I hoard it for my stories. Then when I'm ready and the outline is done, the character sketch is done, then I start drafting. And then I draft very slowly. Like I haven't so far been able to draft faster than writing a book in maybe 6 months, maybe a year. And then I revise quickly, but I draft very slowly. So that's kind of my process. I wish I was faster. It would probably be better for my career, but I'm just slow. Like so far I've been releasing books every 2 years.
But I think that's a really important point, though. Every writer writes differently. Some people are very fast drafters, but then the edit process will take them forever because they've got so much more to fix. So you're probably fixing a lot of that stuff early on, and so your edit process is probably not quite as painful.
No, it's almost like I take a long time drafting, and then my editing is extremely intense. Like I'll do like 12-hour days for an entire month, whereas the drafting might have been like 3 or 4 hours of writing a couple of times a week for a whole year. So I don't know which way is better. It's more, I think I need to kind of, with all of my books, I feel like I've grown with the story. Like the person I was when I wrote Aisha at Last is a little bit different. And the themes I was trying to invest in and think about when I wrote my first novel, very different from the types of things that I was interested in thinking about when I wrote my second. And the same is true for the third. So, you know, we have to make space for us as artists to grow and to experience the world and to change as a result of it. And our opinions are allowed to shift for human beings. And that, I think, comes across in my writing.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, I'm with you on the editing process. I enjoy the editing process more because I think the first drafts where you get it all out, and the edits where the magic happens. So I very much work just like you, but with script writing. Now, thinking specifically about HANA KHAN Carries On, where did the story come from? I mean, Aisha at Last, you've said it's a version of Pride and Prejudice. HANA KHAN Carries On, it's almost a version of You've Got Mail. Do you see these stories that exist and think, I'm going to revise that? Or does it come the other way? Do you come up with the idea and go, okay, well, what sort of structure am I placing that in?
Yeah, it was very serendipitous, actually. It took, I say this story all the time, but I didn't even realize I was writing a Pride and Prejudice retelling when I wrote Aisha at Last. And the book took me so long. It wasn't until like maybe its 5th year when I gave it to a writer friend, and she said, well, this is a classic, you know, Pride and Prejudice trope, which was, I don't know why it took me by surprise, but I thought I was writing something truly original. And then I realized, oh, if I kind of lean into the Pride and Prejudice trope and just change a few elements, this can work really well. And I was writing this in 2017, and I know it wasn't that long ago, but it felt like a different time in publishing. The push for diversity and inclusion has just gotten so much louder over the past few years, over the past 5 years. So when I was drafting this book in 2016 and then trying to find an agent and do all the publishing stuff in 2017, and it eventually sold in summer of 2017, I was really concerned that no one would, with justification, as it turned out, that no one would buy my book because it was extremely Muslim. But all of my books are very rooted in Toronto Muslim culture, Toronto Muslim community. It's unapologetic. There's no violence in my books unless it's kind of from the outside as opposed to from the inside. And you know, I was rejected many times. And so one of the things that that really inspired me when I was writing Aisha at Last was just, okay, if I bill it as a Pride and Prejudice, maybe it'll open a few doors. And so then I published my first book. It did really well. And then when I was drafting the second book, ultimately the inspiration was, again, I tell the story a lot. I was out for dinner with my husband to a kind of a sort of upscale halal restaurant. So I'm sure you guys have this across the pond as well, but it was like a American style steak place, but everything is halal. So you can get halal steaks, halal ribs, just, you know, whereas when my husband and I were growing up, the only halal options were sort of like the ethnic food, you know, so you would get the shawarma places or the tandoori places and things like that. And they were only in certain neighborhoods. Like you had to go to Gerrard Street, which is where all the desi food is in Toronto, in order to get like the halal tandoori chicken. And nowhere else could you get halal food. And I was just telling him, look at how like we have witnessed over the course of 25 years, over the course of our lifetime, the change in this. And our children have been born into a community where they think nothing of having halal pepperoni on their pizza or getting a burger from outside, like a cheeseburger, because it's so widely available. It's not the one restaurant, it's any restaurant practically. And I thought food is such a great shorthand for discussing issues of the way that communities change over the course of generations and the impact of their change and the way that they change their community, but also that they themselves are changed. And also people just love, and you from Aisha last, people just love food in their stories. It's very visceral. I had so many comments about how my books make everyone order Indian food. And then they chai for some reason, because I always talk about chai. Yeah, so that was really the inspiration. And I thought, okay, how can I make this commercial? And the whole layering Pride and Prejudice to my first book really helped. Let me see if I can do that. And I love the classic 90s rom-coms. And one of my favorites is You've Got Mail. It has that classic rom-com trope of like people knowing each other on one platform, but not knowing each other on another platform. And it's ripe for dramatic irony, which is really fun to play with. And that's how the book was born. And
biryani poutine, is this a thing in Canada, or was it created for the book? What does it taste like?
Person that is like, are you insane? Did you invent this like Frankenstein dish that now all the white people are going to ask us about? I'm like, yes, I did. So butter chicken poutine is a real thing. So poutine is like a Canadian regional dish, and it's like some people love it. My kids love it. I like it too. It's basically French fries and gravy and cheese curds. I don't know if you know what cheese curds are, but it's like little chunks of cheese. That's it's delicious. I think it's great. But the biryani poutine, I thought it would be weird because it was my joke. You know how I said I get really bored when I write? I have to make jokes, little jokes, and insert them into my books because then they make me laugh. Otherwise, I'm so bored. I just, I need to keep going. So I write things that make me laugh. Sometimes other people laugh with me, which is nice. And if they don't, I have to take them out in the editing process. But biryani poutine made it through. And it's really about this whole, like, the idea of like the fusion cuisine, right? So like butter chicken poutine, which is like fries with butter chicken curry on top. And I don't know, all of these other, I know other ethnicities have their own kind of fusion types of food. But biryani poutine is particularly weird because it's rice and meat layered with French fries, layered with gravy, and then topped. Just weird. But people have told me that they have actually tried it and that it wasn't bad. In fact, I made it and I posted a video on my Instagram when the book came out. And I didn't like it, but my husband liked it. So I don't know.
So it's kind of one of these Marmite type things. Some people love it, some people hate it. I mean, you might have invented a new dish.
No, nobody should like this. This is wrong. It goes against all the laws of humanity. I disavow my own creation.
What a perfect symbol of that sort of fusion cooking, isn't it? Because it is that thing of, I mean, my mum says it often that we're completely spoiled in terms of what we can have. But I remember being younger and we didn't even order pizza to the house because we didn't know if we could, you didn't know what was halal and cross-contamination and all of that stuff. So we live in very spoiled times. So thinking about Hannah herself, I mean, she's a woman that's dealing with a lot. She's trying to figure out what it is that she wants in her life. She's got that question of, that immigrant kid who wants to do something so different from anyone in her community. There's her father's health issues. There's the business, the family business and everything that's dealing with, her sister's pregnancy. There's a lot. Where did Hannah come from? Was she inspired by someone you knew? Is it kind of based upon your own sort of experiences? Where did she come from?
No, Hannah is nothing like me. In fact, Hannah is a lot more feisty than I was at her age. She came about, I think, from my interest in that in-between period in your life when you're in your early 20s. Hannah's young, she's 24, when you're sort of done school and then you're waiting for the rest of your life to begin. You're waiting for that first job that is like the real job, the job that's going to lead you into the career, whatever it ends up being. And I wanted to kind of layer that with the idea of being the daughter of immigrants, which is a theme that I come back to again and again. And that's something I can relate to. My parents are from India. And then layer that with like just a typical family drama. And it's not all like terrible things, but it's just she is going through multiple crises in her life. And of course, when you're writing a book, you want to write a character who has problems because you want to see them grow. And the problems that she's facing are very normal things. Her older sister is pregnant, is expecting. Her parents are running a business, which is a restaurant business, which is a notoriously difficult thing to do. And they're doing that thing that a lot of families do, where they're not talking about their problems. They're just kind of in survival mode constantly, but not stopping to really evaluate what they're doing with their life and whether they even want to be running this business. And because it's a romantic comedy, you have the cute guy who opens up a restaurant across the street, right? So but he's the rival. So he's the one who's going to put your mom's restaurant out of business. So what are you going to do? So all of this is kind of wrapped up with her own problems. And I've always been very interested in, as a creative writer myself. The only part that I think Hannah and I kind of overlap on is that we're both very creative people. Hannah wants to basically run her own podcast, essentially. But more than that, she wants to have a foot inside of this very traditional radio broadcasting business. She wants to be a journalist. She wants to be taken very seriously, but she also wants the freedom to be able to pursue her own stories and tell them with nuance and depth. And her parents are like, even though they're actually quite supportive of her. And it was important to me to show South Asian immigrant parents being supportive of their children running after their dreams. And the parents' kind of rationalization for this is that, well, we ran after our dreams. We came to a new country. We left our family behind. We were very independent. How can we then expect our children to do anything different when we are clearly so independent ourselves? And, of course, they had different circumstances. So when Hannah does that, she doesn't face the stereotypical kind of like parental opposition, but it's all about how hard it is for someone who has no contacts in a notoriously closed off, difficult industry, creative industry. How does she then create? And that's something I can relate with. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience can relate to as well.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely relate to that. I know when I started, my mom and dad were my dad more than my mom were just kind of like, oh, we're not sure how you're going to do this. Because if you don't see other people doing it, you're not sure how your kids are going to be the first ones to kind of do it. And that really spoke to me, that element of it. And I think it definitely speaks to a lot of young people now as well, who are taking control of podcasting, of TikTok, of all these different platforms where they can put forward their voice without the manipulation by others. Touching upon Aidan then, so he has touches of Mr. Darcy, which I understand now. You must absolutely love Pride and Prejudice, and I think it must be a subconscious thing. But he did remind me a lot of Mr. Darcy. And did his backstory develop as something separate to Hannah, or were you thinking, right, we need someone here, and how do I develop him in opposition to her?
No, that would have been the smart thing to do. I realize that now. I realize that, again, like as a writer, you just, you learn things along the way, that you should have your main protagonist, and then whoever the romantic partner is, or whoever the antagonist is, they should kind of be the opposite. And the key in romance is what I've realized and have learned is that they both have to be missing something, and they fulfill the thing that they're both missing. Anyways, I didn't know any of that when I was drafting. I was just really interested in, I mean, subconsciously, I clearly did, because they're almost opposites of each other, right? It's very obvious, but it wasn't a conscious thing. Hopefully it will be moving on. But I just wanted a person who, Hannah comes from more working class roots, the typical hardworking immigrant type of thing. That's her family. But Aidan, I wanted to show the contrast to that, which was a wealthy person. So someone whose father also as an immigrant, but has basically started a business that was extremely successful, unlike Hannah's parents, who started a restaurant that is still struggling all these years later. But Aidan comes from privilege. And what I really was interested in was exploring the idea of, there's this, I think there's a stereotype in literature, especially literature that features immigrants, where they're all very poor, or they all come from like challenging circumstances. And that's just not the case. Like growing up, we all knew the family who were extremely wealthy, the family who were middle class, the family who were working class, the family who were working poor. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about, growing up attending a mosque. There was social stratification in the sense that, people had different cars that were nicer or houses that were bigger, but we all still attended the same mosque. Our circle still mixed. So I had friends whose parents were, going on vacations all the time. And I had friends whose parents couldn't afford to ever go on vacation ever. And I think that was really good for me. So I wanted to show that, one of the things that I always try to include in my books is the diversity within diverse communities. That's really important to try to capture.
And I think they do work really well against each other and with each other. So I think you must have subconsciously done it without realizing you were doing it.
Well, multiple drafts, right? Like this is the thing, like, and you have this in screenwriting too. You have to iterate. You keep writing and fixing and tweaking and changing. You know, the book that I wrote in the beginning was completely different than the book that ended up being published, and that's just because I just kept working on it. And that's one of the things about writing, that it's, you know, like you want to bang your head against the wall, because it takes, for me anyways, it's just so damn hard. It's such a hard job, but the difficulty is like being able to be almost like looking at your book like a surgeon and being like, I need to take that part out and add this part in, and then it'll be stronger, and then do that for every single aspect of it.
Talking about taking things out, now when I'm redrafting, I always have a document where I put scenes that I have to get rid of because I just can't bring myself to fully delete them. Are there scenes that you lost that you're still kind of like, gosh, that was a really good scene, I know I had to take it out, but it was a good scene and I wish people had seen it? Do you have some of those?
Oh yeah, I definitely do. In fact, my initial version of HANA KHAN Carries On had a completely different plot line, which I changed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and initially, because it's You've Got Mail, it's inspired by You've Got Mail, which for those of you who don't know, the two characters, the Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan character, are friends online over email or whatever, the 1990s version of that, message boards or something, and then they're enemies in real life, business rivals. So my book initially had my main characters meet in a video game, so like an RPG role-playing video game type of thing, and so I invented a whole video game universe with characters and avatars and a plot running throughout the book. I then replaced it with podcasting, which is another huge interest of mine. I listen to podcasts all the time. I love them. I replaced it with podcasting on the advice of my agent. So I wrote a whole book with that entire subplot running through it. And then I gave it to my agent and she was like, no, what are you doing here? There's too many things happening. That detracts from the whole purpose of the story. And she was right. And so I replaced it with Hannah basically running an anonymous podcast. And there's excerpts from the podcast, just a few that run throughout the whole book. And that's where their relationship between, where the kind of You've Got Mail conceit of it runs through.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine it without podcasts, if I'm being honest. It does feel right. We are running out of time, so I've got a few more questions for you. So both your books have been optioned for film. Are you involved in the process, or is it a case of they've been optioned and they're now with the screenwriter and the execs? Do you get much of a say in it?
So HANA KHAN has actually been optioned by Mindy Kaling and Amazon Studios, which is very exciting. And I'm a consulting producer, whatever that means. But basically, I know the screenwriter quite well, Sahar Jahani. She's a friend of mine, and she's lovely. And so we're in touch. But in terms of the actual screenplay that will result, that Sahar will write, I don't have much say in it at all. Aisha at Last was actually optioned by Pascal Pictures initially way back in 2018. And unfortunately the option lapsed, and they were great though. I thought they had a lot of good ideas. Unfortunately, I think the COVID kind of killed it. Like before it really, they were quite progressed, but COVID, I think, really changed the landscape. And then it got re-optioned recently with the Canadian producer, Sienna Films, and they actually optioned it from me, and then they hired me to develop it. So I'm right now working on coming up with a pitch for it, and then hopefully down the road I'll be writing screenplay, and that's inshallah being developed for a television show. But Raisa, you probably know this more than anyone else. This is such a long game when it gets into screenwriting. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if any of these projects will be made. I'm just really happy that producers and studios are really interested in developing Muslim stories, and I know some of them will get made, and I think that's good enough for me as someone who kind of grew up in almost like a desert of almost like a desert of not having any of this. It's been nice to see that there's increasing interest.
And also the fact that it's not just Muslim stories, it's Muslim creatives that they're bringing in to develop those stories and put in those nuances that you can only really come from lived experience. I think you can do all the research, you can have source material, but you can't build in those little moments and those little details often. That's so exciting that you're potentially moving into screenwriting then, and that does, I guess, kind of tie into some of one of my other questions around other forms of writing that you might be interested in. So this would be the first piece of screenwriting you've done. Is that right?
I've dabbled before. So I actually wrote a play for a local theater company in Montreal that will be produced. Because of COVID, it was delayed. It was also a Muslim theater company called Silk Road. So that's going to be hopefully, inshallah, going into production in the spring. I'm going to have a very busy 2023, actually. I have 2 other books that are coming out also in 2023. So I've had a very, very busy year. One of the books is going to be basically another rom-com that I've written by myself. It's called Much Ado About Nada. And it's inspired by Persuasion, but it's a second chance romance that takes place at a massive Muslim conference that takes place in Toronto every year. And that's coming out in June 2023. My next book is coming out in October 2023. And I've co-written that. I've done something new, co-written it with a friend of mine, Marissa Stapley. And it's a multi-faith holiday rom-com. So it's a holiday rom-com about Christmas, Hanukkah, and Ramadan. And that'll be
Wow.
Yeah, it'll be really fun, October 23. And I have a play coming in between those two books. Other than that, I'm open to everything. Like I said, I get bored very easily. So I'm probably going to mix it up with different genres. I love mysteries. So maybe I might try my hand at a mystery next.
I mean, those sound like they're going to get optioned pretty quickly as well, if I'm being very honest. So I would prepare myself to be like, I'm going to write these screenplays and just get yourself in there and allow them to let you write them, because I think you've already got all the stories there. And we need more of those stories on our screens, and we need a diversity of representation in all art forms now, don't we? That give different.
You're so right. Like I think it's a privilege, and I think it's something that's extremely necessary, because really stories move the needle and are what inspire people, and also just kind of change people's perceptions of others, right? Because we get to know each other through the stories that we read and we watch. So inshallah, for me and for the people who are watching, keep writing your stories. They're really important and they're very necessary as well.
Do you have any bits of advice for aspiring writers that are watching? Is there anything that you felt really helped you when you were starting out, or keeps you going when you have those moments where it feels like, gosh, this is taking forever?
I mean, it's like life. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. I think knowing that everything is supposed to take a long time, and when it doesn't, those few instances when things happen very fast, like both my books were optioned very quickly, and it took me by surprise both times. But just resilience, I think, and persistence is probably the most important thing. The stubbornness to keep going, and also being open to getting better, realizing that it's through iteration, leaving your stories, coming back to them maybe months or sometimes years later, realizing how they can be changed and fixing them. That's what makes you a better writer. I wrote maybe 20 drafts of Aisha at Last, another 7 drafts for HANA KHAN Carries On, and I'm constantly fiddling and just like making, like, don't be afraid to make bold, big changes in your drafts. And revision is really the key to getting, to polishing that diamond into something that can be sellable. Unfortunately, if you are going the traditional publishing route, you have to kind of find the sweet spot between commerce and art. You have to be able to sell your book. It has to make money if you want to be a successful writer. Or you can forget all that and do indie publishing, which is also great. And a lot of people make a good living in that way too. I can't speak to that personally, but I know in traditional publishing, it really is about how to get the largest number of people to invest in your career, which is why I'm so grateful for all my readers. So Raisa, thank you for buying my books, and for anyone else who's done that, I really appreciate it. It makes a big deal. Please don't download PDF copies of books from authors. They are illegally downloaded. They do not help anyone. And unfortunately, publishing is such a business that if they don't see sales numbers, they just won't buy any more of your books, which means that the few Muslim authors who are out there, if they're not supported, they will cease to exist.
And in order to sell a book, so when you're a debut author, you will have a manuscript for a book, and you'll have a publisher. Now, with your second book, your third book, and so on, are they expecting to see a full manuscript, or can you sell it with a pitch? I know in film and TV, often we can have a spec script and we can then just have a treatment for an idea, and the spec script is enough for them to see that we can write and we can do it. How does it work with publishing?
Yeah, you know what? It's actually really interesting. I didn't, because I knew so little about publishing, but that's how it works as well. So for instance, I sold the multi-faith holiday rom-com, the one I'm writing with my partner, on a 10-page proposal. Like they didn't, the editor had worked with my writing partner before, so they knew that she could write, and they had read my books before, so they knew that I could write. And so they bought it right away. And I know my publisher at HarperCollins, when I sold HANA KHAN, I sold it as a 2-book deal. So it was HANA KHAN, which was a completed manuscript, and then whatever I wrote next, they had already agreed to buy it and paid me for it. So I think once they know you as a known quantity, as a known entity, they're very likely to keep buying your work. The only caveat here is that sometimes if you want to change publishers or you want to change genres, like if I wanted to write YA, for instance, and I am thinking about it, I think I could probably sell it on spec, but it's probably better for me to just write the whole thing, and I might, perhaps get paid more for it, or maybe, have more interest from various editors based on the actual finished product.
That's really interesting. That's good to know. Good for our listeners that are potential writers as well. So just we did have someone that did put in, it wasn't a question, and she just wanted to see a picture of the book again. So if you could hold up your copy of the book again. They are running a book group for South Asian Muslim women, for middle-aged women, and they were hoping that they could maybe add it to their list of books that they're reading. So that's the Canadian cover, isn't it?
I just realized we're talking to a Scottish crowd here, or a UK crowd, right?
Yes.
This is the American and Canadian cover, but if you just Google HANA KHAN Carries On and my name, Uzma Jalaluddin, you'll see it's a beautiful yellow cover. It's published by Atlantic Books, Corvus Books in the UK. And so they have this really cool kind of pop art yellow cover of HANA KHAN Carries On, but it's the same book, I promise.
Got a leopard print scarf on, doesn't she? And headphones. My friend has stolen my copy of the book. Otherwise, I'd hold it up, but she's stolen it. And our final question for you before we let you go: do you have any dream projects that you just want to put out there, and maybe we can look out for in the future?
Yeah, I have 2 dream projects that I'm hoping to tackle once I catch my breath, because I've had a very busy year. One, like I said, I'm interested in writing a mystery novel that's set also in kind of like a very similar community, Toronto Muslim community, that I've been writing about. And the other one is I want to write a YA book set in a high school. My day job is I'm a high school teacher. I've been teaching for over 15 years now. It's a job that I love, and it's really difficult. And I think I would have a really unique perspective on it. So a mystery set in a high school would be something that I'd be very interested in. And, I love rom-coms too. I think the Muslim community needs to see and have those joyful stories about love that are set within our own community that are unapologetic. So I hope to continue writing those as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for writing the books that you write. I think they're stories that everyone should be reading. And everyone, please go out. Google Uzma, buy both her books. Keep an eye out for the ones coming out next year. Thank you, Uzma.
Thank you, Raisa. I had a great time chatting with you. And thank you again to Iqra for inviting me.